Welcome to my Biden versus DeSantis summer prediction. So let's start. And there we go. So as you can see, there's already a couple of noteworthy safe states that are not in the category. So for the likely states, so for the first one, in Colorado, in 2020, it went to Joe Biden by 13.5%. And what I expect to happen if Ron DeSantis is the nominee is that I still see Colorado still being a likely state, but it would slightly drop from the margin of 2020, of course. I still see it being a good state for the Democrats, but I'd say a win for Joe Biden by around 7 to 9%. And now for the state of New Jersey. As you can see, in 2016, it barely went to Clinton by a safe margin, only 14%. And now in 2020, or I should say after in 2020, it went to Biden by 15.9%. And what I think would happen if Ron DeSantis is the nominee is that he's able to drop it from a safe margin, probably down to 11.5% to 12%, just below that safe margin threshold. And now for the other likely states. So for the states of Texas and Florida. So for those states that are quite similar. In Texas, a state that Donald Trump was not that good at, he was able to win it by only 5.6%. And in 2016, it went to him by 9%. And I do actually think Ron DeSantis would do better than even 2016. While for the state of Florida itself, with someone like Governor Ron DeSantis, you would have a decent chance of the state actually voting to the right of Texas. For Texas, I think he could really do quite well, and I see Ron DeSantis winning here by at least 9% to 11%, around that margin. I expect him to win here by double digits. While for his home state of Florida, it really would be quite close to Texas. And as I was saying, I think that Ron DeSantis would be able to win his home state by around a margin of 8 to 10%. I think if he is quite in a good spot, then he should be able to swing the state to the right by a decent margin. So a big win for him in his home state. For another likely state, let's just go and talk about Ohio, a noteworthy one that I know a lot of you are talking about right now. I know a lot of you would think that Ohio would for sure be a safe state, but I think that Ron DeSantis would be not a shadow exactly what Donald Trump would be in the Rust Belt, but he would not really be as good as him. He still does way better than what other Republicans would have done in the previous era, but I still see Ron DeSantis winning Ohio by a likely margin of 11% to 11.5%, just below that safe margin threshold. And now for another likely state, let's go to the race in North Carolina and the 2nd district of Maine. So in 2020, North Carolina went to Donald Trump by 1.3%, and in 2016 it went to him as well, of course, by almost 4%. And what I think will happen in 2024, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, is the nominee by the Republican Party, is that North Carolina goes by a likely margin just above that 5% threshold, which I do believe would be a decent win for him. While for the race, Maine's 2nd district, I see Ron DeSantis not winning here by the margin of that Trump got in 2016 nor 2020. It depends on the economy. If the economy is really trash, then he could win here by a safe margin, but I'm assuming things got better, and I think DeSantis wins here by 8 to 10% in this race. So if I'm not mistaken, that's it for the likely states. So as you can see, Governor DeSantis leads with 235 against Biden's 191. So for the lean races, so let's start off with the state of Arizona. So for the state in Arizona, it barely went to Joe Biden in 2020 by 0.3%, while in 2016, Trump won here by almost 3.5%. And what I think would happen is that DeSantis would fit the state way more than what Trump it did, and I see Arizona going to Ron DeSantis by a margin of 3 to 5%, which is a decent win for him, almost a likely state, but I don't think so with incumbency. While for the state of Virginia, another close race that is just below that likely threshold. In 2016, it went to Clinton by 5%, and then in 2020, it took a swing to the left by 5% to Joe Biden. And what I think would happen is that it barely drops off from that likely margin. I think Ron DeSantis is able to appeal better in some areas closer to the South and in these areas. And I think Joe Biden still wins here, by the way, but by a margin of like 3 to 5%, which is a bit of a drop off, but still a win for the Democrats. And for the, let's just go to the state of Wisconsin. If you don't know, Wisconsin is quite likely to be the state that holds the 2024 RNC. And what I believe will happen is that we will see kind of it going back to 2016 margins. I still think that due to the unpopularity of Congress and Democrats and the bad economy, it's going to be a bit painful for them. And I still see Ron DeSantis winning here by a lean margin of 1 to 3%, and quite a good win for him, but still would not do as good as what Trump likely would do in this scenario. So for the next states, for the race in Georgia, in 2016, it went to Trump by a likely margin barely, and then in 2020, it swung to the left by a huge margin of 5%, and just a bit higher than 5%. And what I think would happen is that I truly believe the only person that could swing Georgia hard to the left, to the right, in 2024 for one last time for the GOP would be Ron DeSantis. And I see Ron DeSantis barely winning Georgia by a lean margin of 1%, at most 2%. I really don't see the numbers being there in the long term for the GOP, and I still think this would most likely be their last hurrah in the state of Georgia. And for Maine at large, a state that, or I should say the district that went to Joe Biden by 9% in 2020, and in 2016 it went to Clinton by almost 3%. And what I believe would happen in this state is that Joe Biden would still win the state, of course, but not by a big margin that we saw like in 2020. I'm guessing it would be probably 3 to 5%. We still don't know how well does Ron DeSantis would do in the Northeast, but I'm guessing he does okay in this area. And now for the other races, let's go and talk about Minnesota and Pennsylvania. So those states are, in my opinion, are those states that are closest to being tilt states. I think in 2020 you saw 1.2 win for Joe Biden and 7.1 win for him as well. But in 2016, Trump won in Pennsylvania while Clinton barely won in Minnesota. And my belief is that these states would be quite similar in some areas, but I see Pennsylvania going to Governor Ron DeSantis by a lean margin, similar to Wisconsin, but I still see DeSantis winning here and the state being to the left of Wisconsin, so I'm guessing 1 to 2% win. While for the state of Minnesota, I see President Joe Biden still winning here by a lean margin. It's still a decent win for him, but only by 1 to 3%. I still think that it's going to be extremely hard for a Republican to win the state of Minnesota because of the stronghold and the Democratic legacy, but Joe Biden still wins here. Oh wait, I forgot to mention New Mexico. Let's just go right after New Mexico. And New Mexico, in 2016, it went to Clinton by 8%. It swung to the left in 2020, and Joe Biden almost won here by 11%. And what I think would happen is that it would drop to a lean margin, of course. But I think, if DeSantis does well with Latinos, it could actually maybe drop to a tilt margin, but it would be a huge swing from 2020, bear in mind. I still think Joe Biden wins here, but only 1 to 3%, maybe 1 to 2%. It really depends on how DeSantis does with Latinos. So, yeah, And now for another state, for the state of Nevada. This state is just around that awkward area that is around a lean or maybe tilt. I'm gonna give you my prediction for the state. So, for the state of Nevada, it is by far the most interesting state in my opinion. I do think that if Ron DeSantis is able to pull off that social conservatism alongside some populism, fiscally I'm talking about, it could very well be the closest thing that the GOP has seen to not Bush-like margins as we saw in 2000, 2004, but if he's able to manage the boat quite well, he could very well be the person that could swing Nevada and pull it to the right, at least for this election. I think DeSantis is by far the best, would be the best nominee, but the GOP in the Sunbelt, the South, and the Southwest region, and I really do think that with the economy and the appeal by Ron DeSantis during these harsh economic times, I could see Ron DeSantis winning here barely by a lean margin of, I'm guessing, 1% to 3% maybe, or I'm gonna say 1% to 2%, because I'm not sure. It could easily be a tilt state, and I'm just putting it as a lean state because of the horrible approval at the moment and the economy looking like it will go into a recession next quarter. So let's go to the tilt states and the tilt races. For the state of New Hampshire, New Hampshire is one of those states that is really hard to predict. It's just one of those weird states that really could go either way. And what I think would happen is that the low turnout we would see in 2024 by the Democrats, because not much has passed. I mean, Democrats have lost progress even during this Democratic trifecta, which is why I see the turnout being worse than what it was in 2016 perhaps, or even further back. And here are the margins, as you can see. What I think would happen is that because of how swingy and weird New Hampshire is, I would not be surprised if New Hampshire is straight up like goes by a likely margin. But I think most likely it will be a close race, similar to what we saw in 2016, except this time it goes by a tilt margin to the GOP, a high tilt margin in my opinion. And now for before we go to Michigan, let's just go to the 2nd district of Nebraska. So I think Ron DeSantis does have some suburban appeal. We don't know how much he does, which is why I'm gonna hold back on how well he would do in certain areas, districts, and other places. And you can see that in 2020 it swung hard to the left, went to Joe Biden by almost 7%. And I think if Ron DeSantis picks someone like Johnny Ernst as his running mate, I could see him easily winning here by a lean margin, but we don't know who's going to be his running mate if he does decide to run. But I still see Ron DeSantis barely winning the 2nd district due to low turnout and the disapproval against Democrats. And for the last state, for the state of Michigan. So I think Michigan, margin-wise, will be similar to New Hampshire, medium to high tilt, but I'm not sure which party would be. I think Maine 2nd district, same story as New Hampshire. I think Michigan, it could very well be a state that Ron DeSantis has problems with. I would not be surprised by that. But at the end of the day, I don't see Ron DeSantis winning here by a lean margin. I do think he wins here by a tilt margin. He does not do as well as what Donald Trump could be able to do in this area, but he still wins Michigan by a medium to high tilt margin. And as you can see, Ron DeSantis wins with 317 electoral votes against Joe Biden's 221 electoral votes. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next video.